Welcome to Beyond the Next Chapter. One of my favorite things about this podcast is getting to meet so many authors. If you've written a book and you have a book published, I seriously admire you. It is a feat even to get to that point. And I always am excited to meet and introduce you to local Arizona authors as well. And we have one joining us today. Joining us today on the podcast is Jennifer Deibel. She's a teacher in the Phoenix area. And before that, she lived in Ireland and Austria for nearly a decade. Her newest book, Heart of the Glen, is out now. And of course, it takes place in Ireland. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a delight.
So this is your fifth book.
Yes.
How are you feeling about this book compared to the others?
Gosh, I feel like every release is kind of like putting my newborn out there to be judged by the world. But I'm really excited about this one. He might be my favorite hero. He's my grumpiest hero so far, and I just love that for some reason. It's my favorite trope. So I'm very excited, but there's always some nerves that it's gonna people be like, oh no, those first four were a fluke. Like, she can't write. So it's always a little bit nervous, but I'm very excited.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So Owen is the grumpy guy.
Yes.
And tell me the name of the protagonist, the female character.
Yes, her name is Saoirse.
Okay.
So like the actress.
Saoirse.
Ronan, yeah.
Tell people the plot, the story, what to expect in this book.
So this story is set in 1912 in County Donegal, which is way up in the north. It's actually north of Northern Ireland. And Saoirse has just moved from her home in Westmeath to Donegal. She's going to be a housemaid at a castle, but when she gets there, it's all locked up tight, and she learns that the Lord has passed away and his title has died with him, and his wife has fled. So she's literally stuck in the middle of nowhere to go. She can't go home. Her family's all died in a tragic accident. So she just starts walking and is like, I guess I'll figure it out. And this woman comes by late at night, offers her a lift, says, well, you can stay in our barn tonight. We'll talk to my brother in the morning and see if you can, stay with us for a few days. Her brother is a farmer and a tweed weaver for the infamous Donegal tweed. And he's very grumpy, and he doesn't like the idea of having yet another mouth to feed, even if it is a mouth. And but then he gets hit by sheep thieves, and he's badly wounded, and he cannot weave, which is really bad because his sister has just brought back a new giant order from McGee's tweed. So they have to figure out, how are we going to survive this? And so there's some forced proximity, there's a dog, strong female leads, and lots of romantic tension.
Oh, we love that. I love the dog. I love strong female characters. What inspired this story?
Every one of my stories kind of starts with a what if question. And I don't remember how I came across it. I stumbled across an old, like the 70s, documentary of these three brothers who live in Donegal, and one of them is a weaver, one of them watches the house, and then one of them tends the animals. And it's just the three brothers. They never married, they never had kids, and so it's kind of this like swan song of like their art is going to die with them. And so then I started thinking, like, what if they couldn't weave anymore? And so that was kind of the nugget of the story. And so then, of course, I needed to give them lots of problems. And so I just started asking, what would be the biggest problem that they could have, and that he can't weave anymore, and then they're gonna, their livelihood. So, and I've always been fascinated by tweed. We lived in County Donegal for a long time, and so we got to see, firsthand what they make, and it's just beautiful. And so I wanted to kind of work that in because it is such a rich part of the history of that area. And so I just kind of wanted to weave all that together and sort of explore what would happen and what was it like. And I learned a whole lot, and I completely understand why tweed costs what it costs now, because it's phenomenal what they do.
I liked your use of weave. You just talked about weaving it together.
Totally did
that.
That
was a very well-planned word. But cottage weaving was a huge part of this book, and it's something that I knew nothing about going into this, and I found myself looking up videos of people doing this. I mean, it seems pretty difficult.
It does, and it's extremely intricate. It's like playing the organ and sewing and dancing all at the same time. You have to know, and you have to be very meticulous. You have these thousands of it's called the weft that goes kind of horizontal that you do the actual weaving through. And you have to tie every single one of them through these loops and then tie them together and all this kind of stuff. So I read a few books, and then I found a master weaver in Donegal, and he was kind enough to do some video chats with me and exchange probably more emails than he wanted. But he kind of talked me through the process. How would they have dyed the wool? How would they have chosen their colors? How does the loom actually work? What would have it been like? And then I could watch his videos and kind of learn vicariously through him as well. So that was a huge boon to my research. It just kind of gave that authenticity that I definitely couldn't have come up with on my own.
It's so interesting. And you mentioned when you lived in Ireland, you can understand why tweed is so expensive. And why is that? What did you see that made you realize that?
Because it's just that whole process, like, oh my goodness, you spend all that time and the detail and the hours that it takes to just make a couple of inches. It's like, well, of course it costs, a tweed jacket is several $100s because, it's like probably 8 months of somebody's life that it took to just make that fabric, So it really is an art and a craft. And it's masterful, and it's a fascinating to watch.
Totally. And like I mentioned, reading your book, I found myself looking up videos of people doing this because it was so interesting to me. Tell me about the time period when this took place and sort of the things that people had to worry about that we don't really worry about in modern times.
Yeah. So this was 1912, which in the wilds of Donegal is really more like early 1900s, late 1800s. They always seemed to be kind of decades behind the rest of the world. So at that point, some of the world was starting to get electricity. World War I ended, starting 1912. Titanic,
yes,
all that
totally.
kind of stuff. But they were kind of centuries behind, almost feels like. So no running water, no electricity. They had to source all of their own food. So community was really important. And so this village that they live in, Glen, is an actual village that I stumbled upon in my research that's sort of an Irish ghost town. It suddenly just, all the people disappeared from it in around 1912, 1913, and nobody knows why. So it was another question I wanted to explore is like, what could have caused them to, disappear? But you've got the weather, you've got thieves and bandits, you've got all the politics. The troubles haven't really started yet as far as within Ireland itself, Civil War, but the British-Irish thing was still going strong. So there was a lot kind of swirling around them that made their life extremely difficult. Poverty was rampant, and so they really were kind of scraping by day to day.
Yeah. For people who are just learning about you and your books, how would you classify them? Like, what genre would you put them under?
I would say they're sweet and inspirational historical romance. And I like to write things, I teach middle school, and my students, the first thing they do when they know I'm their teachers, they Google all their teachers. And so I wanted to put something out in the world that I could be proud of, that I felt proud if they discovered or if my children discovered. So it's really friendly for probably, teens on up, for people who love swoony romance but don't necessarily want super spicy. And then I always try to put messages of hope and faith through all my stories.
And speaking of that, there's a line in here that I highlighted in my Kindle that I'll say now that I really loved. It read, Owen began to see that he had been keeping all his focus on his hardships, not his source of strength, which I just love that because it's so easy in everyday life to get caught up in the bad stuff that's going on. Is this something you have to remind yourself?
Oh, constantly, especially, I have 3 teenage kids. And so just that alone is enough worry to bury someone. But then, teaching in the public school system, there's a lot of trauma that I see every day. And it can be really easy to just focus on, what feels like the hopelessness and the helplessness of like, am I even making a difference, rather than focusing on what I know to be true and what is going well. I watched a video once, DeWitt Jones, he says, celebrate what's right with the world. He was a photographer for the National Geographic. And so trying to kind of see the world through that lens and finding what's right and what's good and drawing from the positive rather than focusing on the negative is something I strive to do, but it can be really difficult, but it's definitely makes a difference.
When is the last time something happened at school or in your classroom that gave you that little bit of hope? Like, hey, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Oh, okay. I have a student that has come from a really difficult background, and he came to our school new this year. He's been kind of school hopping, and by his records, it looks like he comes about every 3 months. He'll come, and then after that, he leaves, and he'll maybe only come 1 or 2 days a week. And so I really thought, okay, I'm gonna pour into this kid. I'm gonna do what I can when he's here to help him see, he has value. It's worth his time to invest in himself and his learning. And I've seen him really grow. And now when he is there, he goes out of his way to like give me a fist bump and say, "Have a good day, miss," and things like that. And he's not always that way with other staff on campus. And so just seeing that a little bit of kindness can go a long way, and that there kind of is some hope for him out there.
Definitely. And you feel that when you're reading the book too. You were just talking about sort of tropes. What are tropes what are the ones included in this book that you actually enjoy?
Okay. Forced proximity for sure. Grumpy Sunshine. Like I said, he's like the grumpiest hero. We've got some sassy side characters, some good sarcasm, strong female heroes, small town romance. There's probably other ones, but those are my favorites. That kind of tends to work its way.
Speaking of, I really liked Eileen. Is that how to pronounce her name? This sister. You always need like that sister for comedic relief. She kind of was teasing her brother about his like crush. We're not going to give anything away. Did you have any inspiration for that character?
Not directly, but I feel like I've always had my friend group. There's always like all the characters you find in a book. You've got the sarcastic, snarky one. You've got like the nerdy one. You've got the grumpy one and all that. So I've had a lot of experience to draw from, and I myself am fairly snarky in certain scenarios. So I like if I had no filter, what might I say in this moment?
You got to channel it into her.
Yes, that's right.
Which you do. You're right. Every group has one of those people, and I do the snarkiness. Sometimes in real life, you're like, really? But in a book, you need it, and you sort of need that like antagonist a little bit.
Yes,
so we really like a really strong female character as well. Are there any tropes that you don't like that you're like, I'm never including this in my book?
The first one that comes to mind is secret baby.
Oh,
where it's like someone has a kid and
they don't tell the other
person. They don't tell the other person.
Oh.
That kind of a thing, and then like it's discovered like, oh, children.
Yeah.
Surprise. That's not my favorite. Although one of my story ideas that I have involves not really a baby, but an Irish woman who is charged with caring for a British baby that's found, and she has to keep it hidden. So it's kind of secret baby. Not really
but not thing. Really. It's not like you're lying, or it's not like a situation where a man is lying to a woman and cheating and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
That sort of goes along with it.
Yeah. So I don't like that one. And then, I enjoy enemies to lovers, except when it goes to like we are like vitriolic and nasty to each other, and now we're making out. Like that doesn't make sense. So
I think it was your Instagram I was looking at, and one of the tropes you said you didn't like, which I also don't like, is the miscommunication.
Oh yes,
like when people are like when there's a miscommunication, it's like this whole story would not exist if these people were just communicating with each other. That drives me. If they would just tell the other person how they really felt, that drives me a little bit nuts.
Yeah, same. And I probably do have some of that in my story somewhere because that's just human nature.
Totally.
But that can't be the whole conflict of the story.
No.
Like, if you just thought you saw him talking to this girl and you presumed he was flirting, but turns out it's his cousin, and you don't say like.
You're right. It comes up naturally in a lot of books, but when it's the whole I'm like, I can't do this. So.
I don't like.
Yeah, I really like any sort of time travel. Like I love time travel and looking back at the past, and I also love a second chance romance.
Oh, yes.
Oh, second chance romances are my absolute favorite.
I love that. Then you need to read, if you like historical, then you need to read Julie Clausen's. Just left me. She has a series, and book 2 is all second chance romance.
Oh, really?
From she's older, like in her 50s, widow, and it's
Oh,
her romance too. So it's like second chance, not with the same person, but it's like her second chance romance.
gotcha.
But then I also like Courtney Walsh has an amazing second chance romance, hockey romance that
Okay.
is amazing.
Oh,
So fun.
I love it. What kind of books do you like? Like, what books do you read?
Historical romance is my favorite, but when I'm writing, I can't read it because I'm afraid I'm going to accidentally like steal it or like start to like if I'm speaking to people and someone in the group has an accent, I'd sort of naturally mimic the accent without trying to, and I'm afraid that's going to happen in my writing. So I love contemporary romance. I've just gotten into romantic suspense
Mhm.
and a little bit of gothic suspense. I don't know if you've read Jamie Jo Wright, but she
Mm-mm.
does gothic split time.
Mm.
Phenomenal.
Mm.
So those are kind of my go-tos.
I do like dual timelines as well. I
Mhm.
do tend to read this book a lot. I mean, I read a lot of historical fiction, and that just sort of is something that naturally is a part of a lot of historical fiction.
Mhm.
So you teach at a school here in the
Mhm.
Valley, and I interviewed you months ago for a really cool podcast about literacy rates and
Yep.
how you help kids read. So definitely check that out in the podcast we did in the last year. How did you become a published author? How did you go from teacher to now having 5 books?
It was a long journey, and I would say I've been writing my whole life in some capacity. In college, in my first English class, it was like part literature, part creative writing, and my professor at that point had told me I should consider, um, a career that involved writing. But I was like, no, thanks. I want to make money. So I started as a physical therapy major,
Mm.
and later switched to education. So jokes on me. But when we were living in Ireland the second time after we moved back, we were living in Galway, and there was a website that was starting up, a parenting website, and they were looking for contributors. And so I applied and was accepted. And they were like, you might want to start your own blog so that if people like what you write here, they can go find you. And so that's when I started writing, and I picked up what eventually became my debut novel that I had dabbled in when we first left Donegal when I was expecting our first baby. I was just sort of processing what we'd been through and writing things down. And so during that time, I guess it was about 14, 15 years ago now that I started really drafting that first novel. And it was through that parenting website that I got some connections in the writing world. And fast forward to 2016, I started working for a literary PR firm, and that's how I got connected with who would eventually become my agent and the author that would eventually recommend me to my agent and all those kind of things. So it was this like 15-year journey that needed all these little stepping stones in place, which as a person of faith, like I look back and I see, I believe that was God kind of lining up all those things. And if I had tried to get published when I first started writing, I wasn't ready. So all those little connections led to eventually what became Dance in Donegal. And so my author friends do NaNoWriMo, which is writing a novel in a month.
Oh.
So November's National Novel Writing Month. I did NaNoWrite Decade. And so it took me 10 years to get that first book written, and then another, I think 3 before it was actually published. But yeah, it was a long, windy road for sure.
What surprised you most about the publishing world?
Other than how slowly it does move, I think how small it is, especially in the inspirational publishing world and the faith-based books. That publishing world is very small, and everyone is kind of connected somehow, which is absolutely amazing. And the community, it's not, my other authors who write similar things to me, we're not competing with each other. We support each other. They share my books. They champion me. They recommend me to their friends. And it's just this community that I didn't expect to find.
One thing that I have noticed from starting this podcast is how authors are so quick to support other authors. I mean, all of the authors I follow on social media are constantly shouting out other authors. They're writing blurbs, which I didn't know really much about that either. So it is so lovely to see so many authors publicly lifting up other authors as well, because it would be hard. I mean, I told you walking in here, like if you're able to write a book, I applaud you. If you're able to write a book that gets published and that people read, like that's incredible.
It's surreal, absolutely. It would be very lonely without that community because, no one can write it for you. And so sometimes you feel sort of siloed off and you get in your head and you start to feel discouraged and like all of that. So to have that community rally around you all the time is just amazing.
I bet. What advice would you have for somebody who's listening to this thinking, hey, I've always wanted to write a book. What should I do?
Just write it. Just get your booty in the chair and start writing. And there's no perfect way to do it. Every author will tell you they have their own way. Some every now and then you must plot it out and you must do it this way. Don't listen to them. Just get it written and then find other writers in your area. Like the Phoenix Public Library has writers in residence where you can go and they'll look at your writing and they'll give you feedback. And there's writers groups that you can find online and on meetup.com and things like that. So find yourself that community and then just get the words on the page and take each next step as it comes.
Yeah. Plotters versus pantsers. That's the term that I've heard people use. Plotting is you plot out the whole story. Pantsers is like writing by the seat of your pants or whatever. And which one are you?
I call myself a plantser because I have tried to like outline it and all the stuff I make my students do. And for nonfiction, for an essay, that works for me. But for fiction, I know the main plot points. I know the main conflict. I know how it's going to be resolved. I know the characters. But then as all the connecting bits are what surprised me. And every now and then my characters do things that I didn't see coming. And I don't know how that's possible because it's in my head. But, it is what it is. But I spend a lot of time thinking over the next scene when I'm not writing. So I'll kind of write it out in my head in between a writing session. And then when I sit down to write, it plays like a movie in my head and I write down what I see. So it's kind of both and, but definitely more pantser.
Yeah.
Plotter.
I love that. So the first book, it took you said like about 10 years. How long did it take you to write your latest book?
So technically it was a year from when I turned in my last manuscript, when I turned in this manuscript for Heart of the Glen. But if I put together all of the time I actually just spent writing, it was probably maybe 6 weeks total. But it's not getting easier. I thought it would get easier, but I feel like I forget how to write a book every time I start another one.
I bet. So in Heart of the Glen, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, there's a dog Scout, who is a big part. Why is it important for you to add animals like that to stories, and how does that really add to the story?
So, Owen, he's not just a weaver, but he also has sheep. And so if you have sheep in Donegal, they're free range. And so you got to have a way to move them. And so he had to have a dog. And when we lived there, we woke up one morning to this ruckus out in the field next to our house. And we looked and they were actually doing a sheepdog competition where the dogs would go and do their sheepdoggy things. And then they were getting prizes. And I was like, this is amazing. And so I just kind of tucked that away. And so, but I also like sort of that innocence that they bring and that level of warmth. If you're a dog person, that like dogs are just the best. And so it adds that level. And the conversations that Owen has with Stout is like conversations I would have with my dog.
Yeah.
And so just that intimacy and you kind of get to see that softer side of Mr. Grumpy Owen. And so that's fun. And then Stout, he just has a personality all his own too. So it was fun to write.
And we all talk to our dogs and
of
cats.
Course.
I talk to my cats regularly.
Yes, and I narrate, like they answer me.
Yes.
I answer them.
Yes, so we have fake personalities for our cats. I mean, it's just the whole thing. And there was a line also in there. I mean, I liked how also Scout kind of drew, you're going to have to remind me, Saoirse and Owen sort of together because the dog was really drawn to her.
Yes.
Which tells you a lot about a person, which is included in the book.
Yes. That's right. Yeah, she's like, this dog likes me. And he actually really likes Owen. So I don't know if that says more about Owen's character or the dog's character. Yeah. But the dog likes this grumpy old man over here.
Yeah. But
well,
they see the good in people.
They do.
They and it's there with him too, despite the, grumpy.
Yeah.
exterior.
Oh no, he's a big softy. He's a total cinnamon roll. He's all ooey gooey on the inside.
I like that description, cinnamon roll. Let's talk about you lived in Ireland and Austria. I mean, what was that like?
It was amazing. I miss it every day. And you couldn't have two different experiences. We lived in rural Ireland, so we were out in the middle of nowhere on the coast. When we lived in Galway, we were right on the coast of Galway Bay, so we could see the Cliffs of Moher from our living room window out across the bay, which for Princess Bride fans, it's Cliffs of Insanity. And it was just so beautiful and inspirational. The pace of life was slower. Relationships were kind of the most important thing, which I miss. And then in Vienna, you're in the middle of one of the busiest cities in the world, and you're taking public transportation. And so you've got all the big city things, but it also felt very small town at times. They kind of had their own traditions and things, which was fun. So I'm grateful that my children got to experience that we got to experience that, because it definitely broadened my worldview quite a bit, and I think helps me be a better writer as well, because I was able to experience things through a different lens.
Oh, totally.
For so long.
Was it just a no-brainer for you to write books that take place in Ireland?
It was, because it started with that first one where it was kind of a way to process what we had experienced in those 2 years in Donegal. It was 2 of the most amazing years of our life, but probably the 2 hardest years we've ever had. Just being so alone and isolated out on the west coast of Ireland and all of that. And so then once that book got published, we realized there's really no one else writing in that space. There's Irish authors, of course, that write set in Ireland. You've got P.S. I Love You and, all those amazing books. But there really wasn't a whole lot of historical romance happening in Ireland, in the inspirational market or general market. And so we just decided to explore that. And so I have story ideas. I have an idea for one set here in Arizona, but I'm also like, I don't want to disappoint my readers now that they love Ireland. So maybe I'll have to marry the two somehow. But yeah, for now, Ireland is the place to hang out in my brain.
You mentioned the relationships, and that's something that you miss. Explain sort of the differences between the U.S. and Ireland and how we handle relationships.
Yeah. So here, when I'm coming home and our neighbors are coming home, everyone goes and they're like closing the garage door before they even get out of the car. You might get a wave if you're lucky, but that's kind of it. And we have a couple of neighbors that have kids, and so we've kind of connected with them more. But you don't hang out with your neighbors. You don't really talk with them that much. And in Ireland, all of our neighbors knew each other. They would bring things from their garden. And when you're friends with somebody, it was almost rude to call before you stopped over. Which here is like you have to text them and be like, "Hey, I want to come by," and they're like, "Oh my gosh."
Give them like 48-hour notice.
Yeah, exactly. So you pop over, and even if they're getting ready to head out somewhere, they drop what they're doing, they invite you in, you have a cup of tea. It's like, "Oh, sure, no, I'll get the groceries later. It's fine," And so the relationships really are what's paramount. And so I think that's one reason why, the Irish are known for being happy and joyous and joyful. And I think that's a big part of it, is they've got that strong community foundation that I think a lot of us are missing here, just because how busy our life is and how quick the world moves over here.
And in your book, community is a huge part of that. I mean, everyone's trying to help each other. They're working together, and they are constantly talking about having a cuppa. So cuppa tea is that, like, I mean, I've been to other, to England and stuff like that, and it's very real that they have tea in the afternoon.
Oh, yeah. They have tea all the time, constantly. I think I shared a reel from one of my favorite Irish Instagrammers, and he was like, POV, you're Irish. And he's like, great. Dishes are done. I'll have a cup of tea. Oh, I need to do dishes. Think I'll have a cup of tea. Oh, I've got people over. I'm going to have a cup of tea. Oh, people leaving. I'm going to have a cup. Like, they just do it for everything. And I remember the best cup of tea I ever had was after our son was born. In the hospital, they bring you tea and toast.
Oh,
and
wow.
It was like, if I were to have it in any other situation, it probably would have been nasty because it's hospital food. But it was like, that tea just was so soothing. And even now, we keep a stash of our favorite Irish tea. And on a hard day, my husband and I are both like, oh, we gotta have some tea. And it just is like this soothing, and it's a social thing too. You'll have it on your own, but then when you're all together, you gotta have, the first thing you do is pop the kettle on and sit around and
have some tea. What is the tea that you guys like, the one that you have in your house?
We love the Lion's Gold Blend.
Okay.
That's our favorite. Barry's Gold Blend is a close second. Not a PG Tips fan. That's England's tea.
Okay.
But yeah, those are our two favorite. And you can get it at World Market and Amazon. So
so you buy them online and get, I mean these days the world is, you can buy anything anywhere all the time, pretty much, it feels like.
Yeah. And then every now and then, if we know someone that's going over, we'll have them bring us, you can get decaf of the Lion's Gold Blend, which you can't always get online. So they'll bring that for us, or, other little goodies and stuff. But cool. Thank God for the internet.
So Heart of the Glen is out now. What's going to be next for you? Will you wait a little bit of time to start writing your next book? Have you already started that?
So I've got my first nonfiction book coming out
Cool.
in 2026. It's a 31-day devotional inspired by Irish blessings. So each day has an Irish blessing, Bible verses that go with the theme, sort of inspirational thought, and then kind of a prayer prompt to go with that. And then we are kind of in between novel contracts right now, so I'm waiting to hear back on what the next steps are for that.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Great. And Heart of the Glen, if someone's listening to this and they're going to pick it up, what do you want them to know? What do you want folks to know as they're getting ready to read this?
Buckle up and just be ready to have your heart encouraged and to just lose yourself in the wilds of Donegal with Saoirse and Owen.
Now I want to go to Ireland.
Let's go. Let's do it.
You've inspired me. Anything else you want people to know that I haven't asked that you think is important?
I just hope they'll come find me. I love chatting with other readers and writers. So I'm most active on Instagram.
Okay.
But they can find all the links to my socials, sign up for my newsletter, information on all my books at my website. And it's just jenniferdeibel.com.
Okay. Jennifer, thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.